Eric Martin, Lewis Clark State College, and this week we are talking about globalization. The grand questions: what is it? And is anyone or anything in control of it? And maybe I don't know if it's the more interesting question, but the question that historians usually focus on: when did it begin? And what does it matter in terms of when we might assign a beginning date to the process of globalization? Now, that's the first thing I want to talk about. Globalization as a process. Ization. Typically, ization words are letting you know there's some kind of a process going on. So, I've never been particularly satisfied with just talking about globalization at random. It seems to me that it's a process that's occurring to something. So a globalization of the economy, a globalization of culture, a globalization of society, a globalization of politics. You guys get the idea. So this week I want us to think about kind of dissecting globalization a little bit. I realize that the categories overlap, and in some ways making these distinctions is artificial. But in other ways, it might help us to really think a little bit about exactly what it is that we're trying to look at. So, based on the materials for this week, that's the grand question. What is globalization? Is it useful to have these distinguishing categories? And what does it mean for the 21st century? What are the most important ways that the world is changing? What are the most important ways that the world is changing? I think that's an important thing for you to think about, whether you are, 60 years old or 18 years old. Because having a grasp of the ways that the world around you is changing helps allow you to try to change with it and to adapt. The other question is, for these various changes that might be occurring, why are they occurring? Is it a random phenomena, a natural phenomena, or is there someone or some entity in control of this that is making it happen? Now, I'm not necessarily talking about conspiracy theories here, but the idea that do some people own more of globalization than others? Perhaps is one way to think about it. So, the readings for the week. We've got 3 secondary sources, a primary source, and another primary source, but it's a report, and so it's a little different. But we got basically 3 secondary sources, 2 primary sources. Let's talk about the secondary sources real briefly. The piece by Hattata. He's an Egyptian talking about the globalization process occurring in Egypt. Now, one of the interesting things about this particular piece, in my opinion, is he talking about globalization as culture? Or is he talking about it as economics? You can make the argument for either one, I think, in his particular case. And it's interesting to see how he talks about the dynamic between the two. Who does he think is in control of globalization? What does he think is in control of globalization? What does he think globalization is? That's the question. And then you get to Philippe Legrain. Ask the same questions. What does he think globalization is? Who does he think is in control? Who does he think owns it? How might a conversation between Legrain and Hattata over what is globalization, go down? How might that work? Then you've got that Benjamin Barber piece. Now here's the deal with the Benjamin Barber piece. Benjamin Barber's piece is based on 2 terms, the term McWorld and the term jihad. and you need to understand how he is using them. Okay? McWorld, maybe you can guess what it means, but I think you should look up how he defines it. Jihad, if you guess what it means, you will be wrong. That's not the way he's using it. He's using it differently. So make sure you pay attention to the section of the reading where he defines what is jihad, what is McWorld, and what do these two forces, these two visions of the world, have to do with globalization. And then you can go back. Okay, how does what Hatata is describing fit in with McWorld jihad? How does what Lagrange is describing fit in with these concepts of McWorld and jihad? And then our two primary sources. We've got this piece looking at the sweatshops and sort of the take on the global manufacturing business. So take a look at exactly sort of some on-the-ground details about what occurs in some of the manufacturing centers. And, you know, lots of this is connected to bringing out issues in terms of free trade agreements such as NAFTA, which have frequently been looked at as the legal framework for setting up globalization. And then you also have this report from the World Bank. Take a look at the World Bank's focus on what's going on in terms of globalization. What's that perception, at least in this particular document, right? And then, you know, there are these other documents. You've got these cartoons at the end too, right? So you can take a look at the cartoons and get some kind of an idea, I suppose, about popular perceptions, or at least the perceptions put forth in the newspaper in terms of this grand question of what is globalization and how does it impact us? And then, of all the chapters in the course, this is the chapter that you probably have more personal experience with. Now, I want you to focus on how the readings connect in with your personal experience. I want to make sure you did the readings, right? But this is a chapter that is discussing a process going on as we live. It's affecting us. You can see it around you. You can hear people on the news talk about it in ways that maybe you don't in terms of World War I or the Industrial Revolution type thing, right? So make some contemporary connections. That's a pretty cool way to connect history to the modern world. And then come back to that main question. Well, one of the main questions. What's the history of globalization? What's the starting point? And on the one hand, right, you could make this argument. Well, globalization has been going on since 1492 with the integration of the old and the new world. Yeah, all right. Oh, globalization has been going on since the medieval period as the Mongols create trade networks and integration throughout Afro-Eurasia. All right. Oh, globalization has been going on since the ancient period as the Romans expand and take in other cultures. Yeah, okay. But it seems like that maybe there's a difference between large imperial expansion, maybe even cultural contact, more frequent cultural contact between humans, that certainly has been going on since the dawn of humans. But maybe there's something different about globalization. And so if there is, what is it? And then if you can decide what it is, then maybe you can put a time frame on this is kind of when we're going to say globalization begins. I'll give you a hint anyway, or a starting place. It's not the end-all, be-all answer to this. I would put forth the idea that what makes globalization different than the cultural contact that we can see throughout the course of human history is the pace of change. the pace of change. And so if you can come into a general time period in which this is the time period that we can say pace of change of this cultural contact really speeds up, then, in my opinion, you're kind of onto something. But anyway, let's see what you come up with. As usual, if you've got any questions, give me a call in the office, send me an email, drop by the office and talk to me. And until then, enjoy your historical studies.